Hi, everybody. This is Carrie Getz, and welcome to another edition of our podcast series talking about careers for women, trades, and vets in tech. And today we are lucky enough to have Ruthe Farmer with us. And, we try to highlight different scholarships and ways to help folks get an education and get in this industry and break in this industry. And Ruthe has started the Last Mile Education Fund. So, Ruthe, I'm going to let you kick it off by telling us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the foundation.
Sure. So I'm sort of a tech inclusion entrepreneur, and I've been working on lots of different things over the last 2 decades to bring more women, girls, and underrepresented students into STEM, but really focused on tech and engineering mostly. I actually started out in the Girl Scouts and building programs for them. And I, over the course of the last, 10 or so years, I've been watching young women go through this process of becoming engineers and seeing them stumble over just really ridiculous obstacles that just shouldn't be a barrier. And I'm speaking about, low income students in particular, which is sadly 70% of students in the United States. And so I founded the Last Mile Education Fund on this premise of, if we invested in students who were already committed to this field and help them overcome these obstacles, they get to graduation, we get an engineer, which is what we want for industry and for society. And it's a win-win. They become a productive tax-paying citizen and they can be self-sufficient. So in particular, we've been investing in women in computer science because these are people who are going to go into high-paying jobs very quickly, and it just would make no sense for them to not finish when they're so close to the finish line. That's why we're called the Last Mile, is we're investing in students in their last 4 semesters before graduation.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, we talk a lot about on this podcast sort of the inequity, and certainly we're seeing it right now with COVID because 5 times more women than men have lost their jobs to become the caregivers. Well, we have a hashtag that follows this podcast, hire the person, not the paper, where we really talk about the skills that are involved, and the degree should not be the first condition for hiring. But certainly, there's some for engineers, for instance, the degree is a necessity for hiring. But really, I think a lot of young people don't really know where to turn when they try to figure out how to make that last mile work or how to make that last little bit work. And it's unfortunate because a lot of them have the drive and have the interest. They just don't have the wherewithal. So I think it would be really good for everybody to just kind of get an idea, maybe some realistic stories of some of the people that this has helped, because some of the examples are so simple that I think people just don't really realize that these are barriers that you guys are solving. So give us a couple stories, protect the names of the innocent, obviously, but tell us about some of the ways that this money's being used.
Yeah, so it's really been gratifying and compelling to be able to do this during the pandemic when so many young people were in crisis and didn't have anywhere to go for help, and to be able to say yes and help them very quickly. So when we launched our COVID emergency fund last spring, we immediately, within 7 days, we're deploying over 70 grants. And I remember very clearly this one student had asked for money for gas because she was driving 2 hours a day from the reservation where her home was to sit in the parking lot on the campus of Navajo Technical Institute to access the internet. She didn't have internet in her home. And that's a stark reality for a lot of people in rural communities. And I think most people just don't realize that it's prohibitively expensive to get internet to some rural areas like the reservations and I'm sure, as you know, in the rural South. And then we had some other students who, simply they lost their jobs. They lost their source of income, were not able to work. And for many low-income students, they work. They work on campus, they work off campus, they work as a waitress or in a retail job to pay the bills. And when that goes away, students aren't eligible in many states for unemployment, even though they had a job and were paying into the unemployment insurance. And so they also weren't eligible for the stimulus. So with several students, we have closed that gap for them because in many cases, the universities have set up these systems where it's automated. If you haven't paid your bill, they'll literally lock you out of your online classes, lock you out of your access to your education. And that's really tragic. But the thing that really inspired this fund in the beginning was particular students that I knew that were struggling with basic access to opportunities. Like, how do I get to that internship where I have to arrive, have a place to live, travel there, but you don't get paid until you've been there a month? And, moving across country to, say, San Francisco to, where it's $1,800 a month to have a place to live. And in some cases, we are talking about women, and women can't just like sign up to rent a room from some random person on Craigslist. You need to know that you're going to be in a safe place that's accessible for you to get to your workplace. And I have had students who, ended up in an Airbnb situation that was kind of sketchy and needed to get out quickly because they didn't feel physically safe. And so, I really always encourage employers to think through these barriers as they're hiring, especially women, that you can't just expect women to just find a place to sleep. I remember I talked to one employer who was like, oh, well, we hire people who would, do anything, sleep in a van in the parking lot to work here. And I'm like, so you don't want to hire any women? Because women can't safely sleep in a van in your parking lot. Like the realities of life for women and life for low income students are different. And last spring, one student that just broke my heart. It was middle of April, and we'd already been giving out grants for about 2 weeks at this point. And many of the universities had closed their dorms, had told the student to go home with very few days' notice. And this student who went to Harvard wrote to us and said, I need $400. I need $120 for gas to drive home, and 2 nights of hotel and 3 days of food. This kid had been sleeping on somebody's sofa trying to do online school because, not every kid can just buy a $3,000 last minute plane ticket and drive home. Low income families save up for that trip home from college. There's these simple things. And in many cases, we've bought laptops. We've bought 20 different students a laptop because there were students who were relying on the devices and the computer labs in their institutions for both internet and a device. And suddenly when all those doors were closed and you can no longer go use the library or the resources, they're struggling to keep up. And, frankly, I think any student who's studying any kind of STEM major absolutely needs a state-of-the-art machine if we want them to graduate capable of working with state-of-the-art technology.
Yeah, you can't do this as a practical job based on theory alone and never actually doing any of it. So for sure. And then, we were talking earlier too about just simple things like having a credit card to go to a job interview and being able to take a train to a job interview.
Yeah, it's interesting. Many companies treat the interview process just like they would treat their own employees. So, you pay for things and you get reimbursed, and you make assumptions like that you can check into a hotel. If you're checking into a hotel or renting a car without a credit card, if you're using a debit card, which is what many students have, they will put a $300 to $500 hold on your account. And I know when I was in college, my account hovered around $200 most of the time. I didn't have $300 to $500 that could be locked up. And so many, many times I have checked young women into their hotels at conferences where they had a free trip to the conference, quote unquote free. But, even free and paid opportunities are not free for low income students, because if you don't have the credit to get you that hotel room or to get you to use that Uber credit, right, to get to whatever thing you're doing, those things become inaccessible. And I did have a student tell me that she had to, in the middle of an interview process, call the recruiter and say, I can't check into the hotel. So now here she is going into this tough, coding interview situation in a top tech company, having to compete with peers who are far more well-resourced than she is. And then she has to other herself in calling this recruiter and being like, I can't, I'm a problem, basically. And that shouldn't be a hurdle. And it's actually really easy to solve if we change the way we approach the interview process for students and young people that are early career, and we equalize it for everybody. And there's ways we could do that with, prepaid credit cards or other products that I'm working on thinking about how to solve that, because you can't treat everyone as though they have $100,000 a year salary already.
We talk a lot about this, about how HR really needs to evolve, and HR has been a very slow moving machine in a lot of these cases. And so I think just that little leg up, here's your train money, go on your interview, or, it's such a simple little thing, but I think it's so awesome that you're thinking of that.
Well, and thinking about it from, I think you're right. It's an HR policy problem. And I think for a large part, they don't even know the problem exists. And so helping to tell the stories that are going to illustrate this for the corporate sector. And we're not talking about a niche population. Low-income students are 70% of students in college. 70% of students in college are on financial aid. And 52% of all kids in K-12 schools are on free lunch. So we're talking about half the population potentially that you're leaving out if you don't fix some of these structural barriers. And so it's simply smart business, right?
Yeah.
To rethink these things.
Exactly. And everybody needs a hand up, which is way different than a handout. So, I would say that for those listening, especially anybody that has something to do with HR, these are super easy things. Prepay their hotel room, buy them a bus ticket. All of those things, it shouldn't be out of somebody's pocket first, for sure.
Yeah,
and in some
the
cases,
challenge with the hotel rooms and things is, even if the hotel room is prepaid, they're still putting a hold on your credit card, right? For incidentals. And so I think we need to, as a society, get creative about some of this. And so I'm actually working on what is a credit product that could be created that solves this problem, and talking to bankers and trying to think it through. Is there a solution for this? But also, thinking about the accessibility of things that companies are using as markers, right? So there's all these markers of potential, how many conferences did you go to? How many projects do you do on the side, right? What are all your side tech projects? Or how many hackathons have you gone to? The ability to spend an entire weekend going to a hackathon and traveling there and not working during that time is reserved for those who have affluence and can take the time to not work that weekend, can fly, can front the plane ticket until they get reimbursed, all of those factors. And so we need to really consider all the places that access and affluence are built into these supposed markers of potential. And I would argue that a really, resilient, hardy, stick-to-itiveness oriented student who is working and going to school and balancing this whole thing, they're going to make an incredible employee versus a student who never had to struggle in that way.
Well, and I think there's a lot to be learned in the struggle. So hats off to all of those that have figured out how to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's really incredible what happens when someone, recognizes your potential and says, you could be doing more, or you're cut out for more. And it really has a lot of power. And what Last Mile is trying to do is identify these striving students that are out there that are needlessly, moving too slow or being derailed by stupid small financial barriers. I mean, it's just simply stupid for a student who is in a high demand field who's going to be contributing to innovation, who's going to be solving one of our biggest workforce problems, which is technology talent, to not succeed. Like, it just makes no sense. And especially if it's over something as trivial as a few $1,000s. And so we are, I don't know if you saw this, but yesterday we announced a new cybersecurity fund. And
Oh, good for you.
that is now, it's an emergency fund specifically for women aimed at careers in cybersecurity, in partnership with Women in Cybersecurity, WSIS.org. And they are really keen on helping their members to succeed and survive this pandemic and move forward in their lives. And I'm sure you know this country really needs cybersecurity talent. Like,
Sure. So this fund was actually inspired by a young woman from Mississippi named Ryan, and she's one of our co-founders. And I knew her since high school, and she was part of an online community that I work with for young women in tech. And her junior year, she was going to forego an internship at a big bank that was going to pay her a really nice salary and be the internship they would hire her on, because she couldn't afford to actually get to the internship, get a place to live until she got paid. And so we helped her get a place to live and fly to the internship. And now she's, a software engineer working in a bank, making a really nice salary, and the co-founder of this fund. And so that was our big idea. So the way we find students is there's lots and lots of organizations working to get students into these fields, like the National Society of Black Engineers, the Society of Women Engineers, National Center for Women in IT, lots of organizations where we can find students. And what we're specifically investing in is students who have made a commitment to a career and a degree in tech or engineering that are in their junior or senior year. And so we don't ask for GPA. We don't care about your GPA. If you've made it to your junior or senior year in computer science or engineering, you're pretty committed, and it would be a loss for you to not finish. And so we're helping them with that last mile. And what that means is maybe, their car broke down, and scholarships and financial aid won't pay for your car repair. What we're paying for are basic needs, making sure that students have the living expenses, internet access, a working computer that is going to help them with their studies and be good at their craft. And so we step in that gap where financial aid has ended, or they've run out of money, or just won't pay for those expenses. Because most low-income students are walking kind of a tightrope of financial stability. And one thing like a medical event, a car repair, a pandemic can derail that delicate balance. And so right now we're paying the living expenses of dozens of young women who actually have jobs waiting for them. But right now, today, they do not have money for food and rent. Oh, well, we fund from an abundance viewpoint, meaning we're not making the students compete against each other, right? The student asks us for money, we evaluate that student and invest in that student, not a competition of hundreds and winnowed down to a couple. We also do it very fast. We're responding and funding students within a week, typically. And so many students tell us, they're like, we can't believe you responded. We can't believe you're real. Because so many scholarships are about finding the best of the best. Whereas we're here to invest in the potential of people who maybe could be the best if they had the same resources as everybody else.
People that have had a leg up or had somebody help them out tend to be much better global citizens moving forward and tend to pay it forward, to somebody else. So I think all of those are really great things.
We all suffer when a young person doesn't live up to their potential. Our society suffers in that we don't have someone putting resources into, the tax base and the community. When people have good jobs and they have stabilities, they have families, they have homes, they contribute to society. And when people have debts they can't pay and are living on the edge. They can't live up to their potential. And so I look at this from the perspective of an investment. I am here to invest in the potential of young people and help them overcome these obstacles that are really beyond their control. And I'm 100% with you on this GPA thing. It is ridiculous. The GPA expectations that many employers have for new hires and many scholarships have basically tell low income students, you do not get the luxury of struggling. And if you came into from a high school that didn't have quality calculus or even offer calculus, your chances of getting straight A's your first year of engineering school are close to zero. We need to give these kids a bit of a break. And you can't expect a kid to go to a low resource high school and be able to walk into an engineering classroom and compete with affluent kids who had calculus and advanced math preparation. It's just not fair. And so if you get a low grade as a freshman, that's going to carry with you for years. You can't bring that back up. And so we're very committed to this. We do not even request their GPA.
Well, and stress causes a lot of that too, right? If you're under a lot of stress, you're not going to be performing to your best. Even if you have full command of the subject, if you're having just a really, really bad week because your car broke down or you can't make the rent or one of those things, that stress absolutely plays through. You'd like to say you could separate it, but we've both been in the industry for a while, and you try to have a separate personal life from your professional life, but it bleeds over, and the same thing happens in school.
Well, and I would actually argue that it is better to hire a person who has struggled and kept going than someone who has never met an obstacle. But our systems, we're looking for GPA, we're looking for all the prior awards you've won and how successful you've always been, actually optimizes for people who've never had a bump. It optimizes for smooth sailing. What I want to optimize for is resilience and persistence.
Well, yeah, and that's the people you want on your team, right? The ones that are scrappy, that know how to sort it out. But honestly, it's the brilliant minds that are come out of those communities that are going to make the biggest impact.
It's also hard to find the problems to solve, right? So if everybody's creating technology is, living in San Francisco and New York and Atlanta, and they all have ubiquitous Wi-Fi all the time, they don't really truly understand the experience. So one of the things when we're talking about the digital divide, it's like if everybody creating educational tools and software is living in a universe where they have the internet all the time, they're putting these expectations. I'm like, very, very few low-income kids are going home to a house where they have a computer to themselves every night for 2 hours with broadband.
Yeah, I think we've definitely learned that through COVID, that there is a huge digital divide, and not just kids that don't have access to broadband, kids that just don't have access. And certainly when the parents lose their income, that gets worse because then they can't afford that access anyway. So I think it's really, really admirable and great what you guys are doing.
Well, it's gratifying every single day to be able to, when a student asks for help and we're able to help them. And when we did our launch in January, we did this campaign called Last Mile Moment, because I really want students to know that everyone who is successful has had some help from someone. At some time in their life, someone gave them a break, someone encouraged them, someone gave them a little bit of support. And it is okay to ask for help because we desperately need diverse minds in technology. And if a student is on that path, we at Last Mile are certainly committed to helping them get there and making sure that they have the tools and resources to be successful.
So tell us a little bit about if somebody wants to get involved and donate. That's always important to be able to pay this forward and help these students. And then B, on the flip side, for the students that are listening, tell us where they need to go and what they need to do to apply for this money and how all that comes about from your perspective.
Sure. So the Last Mile Fund is pretty new and obviously very interested in donations. And I've built this as a platform. So if a funder is interested in, say, a regional fund, they want to fund only students in Mississippi, or maybe they want to fund only students in electrical engineering or chemical engineering, we can certainly do that. We built it as a flexible platform. For individual donors, almost every dollar that you give us is going straight to a student. Your funding might be going directly to making sure a student has their phone bill paid so that they can access Wi-Fi and get to their classes. It might be making sure that they have food to eat, or paying, that last little graduation fee. And we get the funding to students very quickly. So you can go to lastmile-ed.org/donate to do that, or just contact us. And for students, we have funding for women who are studying computing degrees. So there's 117 different degrees that count as that, including like cybersecurity, data science, information science, computer science. And we are investing in students that are within 4 semesters of graduation. And they go to lastmile-ed.org/apply. And they can apply for emergency funds, which is under $600 for just, an emergency thing that's come up and you really need help right away. We have bridge funds, which are for bigger issues like your car broke down and it's $1,200, or you need to pay rent or something like that. And then we have last mile funds, which is really for seniors who are just like this close to the end and they just need the last few credits to graduation. Those dollars typically go to the institution to pay for tuition and fees. Because, $1,000 invested in inspiring a kid in high school is great, but $1,000 right now in the last mile is going to make or break whether or not that student gets to the finish line.
Oh, I've absolutely had times in my life where $1,000 would have been life-changing.
Yeah.
Literally
it's
life-changing.
Life-changing money. I mean, it is life-changing money for these students. In some cases, we've had students who were eating at a food bank. Meanwhile, they're interviewing at Microsoft. It's crazy. Like, let's just resource these young people we so desperately need. Actually, we already have over 1,000 students that have applied for this fund, and they're 35% Black women, 33% Latinas. Like, we've got a big list of students who are mostly women of color about to graduate with degrees in tech and engineering, ready for the workforce. So if an employer is looking for a place to invest that's going to have a really quick return, this is a good one.
I agree. I absolutely agree. It really is sustenance while so you can feed yourself while you feed your brain.
Yeah. Well, and we can't expect low-income students to compete in the interview process and on grades if they don't have their basic needs met.
Yeah, you've got a couple great statistics too. 56% of students with 3 or more years of college report experiencing basic needs insecurity, such as food, housing, and healthcare, which is kind of a staggering number, really. And the wealthiest students receive 34% more non-federal aid per year than the poorest students, who, are around 11,300 versus 7,500. So that's a pretty good inequity there too. And 11% of students from the lowest income quartile and 20% from the second lowest graduate within 6 years, compared to 58% of all students. And so I think that really speaks to the struggle.
Yeah, it's really abysmal success rate. If 11% of our lowest income students graduate within 6 years, 11%, that's a terrible success rate. And if we can improve that even a little bit, it goes a long, long way. We've also calculated that if we can pull this off, so I have a goal of raising $15 million and investing that over a decade in 38,000 students. If we can do that, that will generate $557 million of increased GDP in the form of increased earnings by these women by 2033. And that is perpetual. They're going to keep working. And not to mention all of the economic activity of those women buying homes in their community, buying cars, having families, doing all of those things. So there's a huge halo effect. And, if we go back to Ryan, our co-founder, Ryan's under 25. She's bought a house. She's getting her master's at Virginia Tech. She's taking care of her 2 siblings. And she's out of poverty forever. And it was an intervention of a couple $1,000s that made sure that happened. And, when you look at all the sunk costs that have gone into getting a student from high school or middle school all the way to their junior year, or even into a 2-year degree program, getting them that far, we've got to realize the gains on those sunk costs.
Yeah. Well, we're running up close to the end of time here. And so I want to make sure that everybody gets the place to go help first.
lastmile-ed.org.
There you go.
So if you just look for us on Twitter, we're at MileFund. And you can also just, Google Last Mile Education Fund and we should come up.
Well, I think that it's wonderful what you guys are doing. I think it's absolutely amazing. I'm so happy that you got to come do this podcast with us. I hope somebody out there listening figures out, this fund and actually gets to either fund it or take advantage of it, and it makes a difference in their life. So thank you so much, Ruthe. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Great meeting you.
Thanks for listening. We look forward to hosting you on another edition of this podcast. Have a great day.